Welcome. Today we would like to welcome. Today, yeah. Yes. Wow, genius.
Testing. Rick. Testing. 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 Testing.
Why did we change it?
Because the other one wasn't working. Testing. Testing.
Light was on.
All right. Testing. Testing. Testing.
The light's on.
Is it? Testing.
No sound.
Testing.
Welcome, Dr. Jane Goodall. Dr. Goodall has devoted her life to the scientific study of chimpanzees. She is now into her 5th decade of working with these animals in Gombe, Tanzania, Africa. Dr. Goodall's discoveries rocked the scientific world, changing scientists' perspectives of the nature of wild chimpanzees. The more she studied them, the more she realized how much they were like humans.
Beginning in 1991, Dr. Jane Goodall changed the emphasis. She no longer spends any significant amount of time in Gombe. Instead, she travels 300 days a year, encouraging all of us to make a difference, as she promotes her program of Roots and Shoots. Taipei American School became the first international school to become a Roots and Shoots member K through 12. We did this in 1999.
It is now our privilege to welcome Dr. Goodall to speak to us today so that we can learn more about her original work and the vision she has for the future. Dr. Goodall, welcome.
Thanks. Well, good morning, everyone. Let's have a little exercise here. I want you to repeat good morning in different languages for me. Can you all hear? Should this be higher? I dare not touch it in case it makes bad noises. Is it okay? Can you hear at the back? Okay. Well, then let's, first of all, English is easy. Good morning.
Good morning.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Good morgen.
Good morning.
Jambo.
Jambo.
That's Kiswahili. Come on. Right. That's your lesson in chimpanzee. Probably your first lesson in chimpanzee. Maybe it'll be your last lesson in chimpanzee. Who knows? But that is the sound that you would hear if you went to Gombe National Park in Tanzania and you climbed up the hills in the morning and you settled down to wait on one of the ridges that run between the thickly forested valleys which run down to Lake Tanganyika from the peaks of the Rift Escarpment. And because the chimpanzees live not in a troop like gorillas, like baboons, like most monkeys, but because within their community, which is about 50, they travel in small, always changing groups. This distance call, this good morning of the chimpanzee, means that they can make that sound and then they listen. And they hear an answer maybe. And because every chimp has his or her own individual voice, you know exactly who that answering call is made by. And so then you can make a decision. Do you join that other individual? Maybe you don't like that one, so maybe you just choose to ignore it. Or maybe you answer it very excitedly and go hastening off to join a big group feasting on a delicious kind of fruit. Or maybe you run hastily in the opposite direction because it's a call made by chimps from a neighboring social group. So basically, those are your enemies. So chimpanzees are always having to make these decisions. Life isn't easy for them. Rather like us. We have to make decisions when we grow up as to what kind of career we'll take and where we will go shopping and what we will buy and what we'll eat for supper. We're always making these decisions. Well, so are the chimps. And before I show you the slides that I've brought, I'm going to just tell you a couple of stories because, you know, we know today that chimpanzees are more like us biologically than any other living creature. The composition of the blood is so much like ours that you could actually get a blood transfusion from a chimp. You couldn't from a gorilla. You certainly couldn't from a monkey or any other animal. But in a chimpanzee, if you match the blood group, you could actually have a blood transfusion. So a chimpanzee could save your life, but in the same way, you could save the life of a chimpanzee. And their responses to disease are so like ours that chimpanzees can catch or be infected by all known human contagious diseases, which is why they're used by some people in medical research. And the brain is more like ours than that of any other living creature, except that of the other great apes. And so it shouldn't be surprising that there are all these similarities in social behavior as well. And this is a story, and I'd like you to imagine now that we're in a forest, and there are little specks of sunlight coming down through the canopy overhead, and they're dancing about on the forest floor, and it's very dim and green and quiet in the forest. And we're following two chimpanzees, imagine. An adolescent female of 9 years old, her name is Pom, and her little brother, Prof. He's just 3, still a bit unsteady on his feet. And the mother is way behind us. And as they walk along this trail, suddenly Pom stops. She sees something on the trail ahead of her. Her hair stands a little bit on end, which is a sign of fear. And she gives a little tiny, ooh, wah, wah. And she rushes up a tree. Well, her little brother, maybe he doesn't hear that little warning sound, or maybe he doesn't know what it means. He carries on along the trail, still a little unsteady on his feet like a human toddler. And the closer he gets to this place on the trail ahead, the more his sister becomes terrified. She's up in the tree with every hair on end and a big grin of fear on her face. And finally she can't bear it any longer, and she rushes down, she picks up her little brother, and she climbs up the tree with him. And there, coiled up at the side of the trail, is a big poisonous snake. She saves his life. Second story is about Prof, the little brother, when he's now 8 years old, and he's got a little baby brother of 2. His little brother is called Pax. And on this particular occasion, Prof and Pax are sitting with their mother, Passion, and Prof is grooming Passion, and the little one, little Pax, has a terrible, terrible cold, and his nose is all bunged up, and he's breathing through his mouth. And finally, he's able to give an enormous sneeze. Well, you can imagine if you have a very blocked up nose and you give an enormous sneeze, what it looks like. And Prof stopped grooming his mother, and he looked down rather worriedly at this messy face. And after a minute, he reached out and he picked a handful of leaves and he cleaned up his little brother's face. The third story is about an old chimpanzee who got paralyzed in one arm in an epidemic of polio. Remember I said chimps can catch all our diseases? And she's finding it very difficult to travel around as she gets older. And on this occasion, we're following Madam B, that's her name, and her eldest daughter, little B. And they're going a long distance to a big fruit tree. And when they get there, Madam B is very tired. She's only got one arm, and she can't tackle climbing this big tree with just one arm. She's too tired. So she lies on the ground, and her daughter climbs up into the tree and gives the happy sounds that chimps make when they find good food. And after feeding for about 10 minutes, little bee stuffs as much fruit as she can in her mouth, and chimps have these big lips, so quite a lot of fruit goes into your mouth. And then she put as many fruits as she could hold in one hand. She climbed down the tree, and she gave the fruits from her hand to her old mother. And the last story that I'm going to tell you now is about a little infant who lost his mother when he was just 3 years old. And when you're 3 years old, you're still suckling from your mother, you're still riding on her back, and you're still sleeping in her bed or her nest at night. But when you're 3, you're just able to survive without milk. You've begun to eat enough fruits and vegetables. But normally the 3-year-old infant will die if he loses his mother, because he needs her support, he needs her affection, he needs her love. And usually when a mother dies, an older brother or sister will look after the little orphan, and then they may survive because they get that love and that affection and that security. But little Mel didn't have an older brother or sister, and we thought that he would die. But to our amazement, he was actually adopted by a 12-year-old adolescent male who wasn't even related to Mel. And yet Spindle waited for him in travel. He let Spindle ride on his back. He let Spindle even cling to his belly like he would to his mother if he was frightened or cold. And when Mel begged for food from Spindle, Spindle would share. And when Spindle made his nest, his comfortable nest in the trees, bending over big branches, Mel was too young to make his own nest. And so he would go and sit at the edge of Spindle's nest and make his sad little whoo, and Spindle would reach out and draw him close. And even Spindle would rescue him if Mel got too close to the big males when they're doing these amazing charging displays, when they're hurtling across the ground, slapping with their hands, stamping with their feet, swaying vegetation, picking up and throwing rocks. And if an infant gets in the way, then the infant may be picked up and thrown as if he's a rock. And the mother's job is to make sure that the infant keeps away until the child has learned. But Mel didn't have a mother to teach him that. Instead, Spindle took on that role as well, running in to rescue Mel when the males were socially aroused. And the reason this was so amazing is that Spindle was at the age when these adolescent males are hero-worshipping the big males. They're watching everything they do. They're learning from them. They're learning what you need to know to be a male in your wild chimpanzee society. But at the same time as they're fascinated by the big males, and they're beginning to leave their mothers to travel with the big males for first a few hours and then a few days, but they're also much more cautious. They keep out of the way because the big males sense them as an up-and-coming threat. And if they get too close, when the males are socially charged up, then the adolescent males may get buffeted. Spindle risked that, and he often did get hit by the big males. And there's no question he saved Mel's life. Spindle saved Mel's life. Why did he do it? Well, the epidemic in which Mel lost his mother was an epidemic of something like pneumonia. At the same time, Spindle lost his mother. And although when you're 12 years old, you don't need a mother, you can live perfectly well without her, nevertheless, if something goes wrong in your life, if you're traveling far away with the big males and perhaps you get hurt, if your mother's alive, you go back and spend time with her till you're well again. And maybe losing his mother left a sort of space in Spindle's heart, and he felt better by spending time with a small, dependent infant. We'll never know, but I lost my mother last year. And when you lose your best friend after 67 years, it does leave an empty space in your life. And so we'll never know why Spindle adopted Mel, but maybe that was part of the reason. So those stories show you how the chimpanzee has these strong family bonds. And I've picked out just a few slides to show you what's happening in the chimpanzee community at Gombe and to give you a feeling of the long-term history of this research, which is the longest study of any group of animals in the world ever. So if we can have the lights off, including the spotlight on me, especially the spotlight on me. So, one shot of Dr. Jane back in 1960, when I first arrived at Gombe National Park. And when I first got there, some of you may remember if you've seen the documentary, the biggest problem was that the chimps kept running away from me. And even if they were on the other side of one of these steep valleys, if they saw this peculiar white ape, they would run away. And it was because I was patient and wore the same colored clothes every day and didn't try to get too close too quickly that eventually the chimpanzees realized that I wasn't as frightening as they first had thought. During those early months of real frustration with chimpanzees running away, my biggest worry, do these lights not go off, these things that are blinding me? Because if they do, it would be great. If they don't, I'll just turn my back on everyone. But in those early days, I was really worried that the money would run out before I'd seen anything really exciting. It was very, very hard to get money for that study, because when I set out for Africa, thank you, when I set out for Africa, I did not have a degree of any kind. I just left high school. And I saved up my money and I got to Kenya in Africa. I saved up my money by being a waitress and serving people their breakfast, their lunches, their teas and their dinners until I had enough money saved up to get a return fare by boat to Africa. And I hadn't been to university because at that time we couldn't afford university. We couldn't afford a bicycle, let alone a motor car. And it was my mother who suggested that I took a secretarial course so that I could get a job anywhere in the world. And then I had a letter from a school friend saying, come for a holiday to Kenya. My parents have bought a farm. So there was the opportunity, and I saved up the money, and I arrived in Africa, met Louis Leakey, and he suggested this chimpanzee study. But nobody wanted to provide money for it because I didn't have any education in university, and because I'd only just arrived from England, so clearly I was very unsuitable. And in those days, girls didn't do that kind of thing. But in the end, a wealthy American businessman gave money for the first 6 months. And I was terrified that if I didn't find something exciting, Louis Leakey would never get money for me to continue. But fortunately, during that first 6 months, actually the 4th month, I made this breakthrough discovery that chimpanzees use and make tools. Not only picking up little pieces of grass like this to fish termites from their underground nests, but in addition, picking leafy twigs and pulling away the leaves, and that's the beginning of tool making. And the reason that this was so exciting was because at that time it was thought that human beings and only human beings used and made tools. And so this was the observation that enabled Louis Leakey to go to the National Geographic Society, and they provided money for me to continue the research for the next several years. So it was a very, very exciting day that I will never forget. In chimpanzee society, the males are the big dominant sex. They are more aggressive than females, at least they fight more often. And this is an adult male with his hair bristling, his lips all bunched in a furious scowl. And this is the kind of display that Spindle made sure to rescue Mel when he saw the males beginning to puff out like this. The chimpanzees have a hierarchy. There's a male up at the top, and then there's number 2, number 3, number 4. Every individual knows his or her place in this hierarchy. All the adult males are dominant to the adult females. And because they know their place in this hierarchy, it means that most of their disputes they can solve by means of threat. They don't have to fight. Here's a male, he's swaggering at a female. She's already beginning to move away. He doesn't have to attack her, and that's much more adaptive. And after some kind of aggression, whether it's threat, whether it's attack, usually the victim will approach the aggressor, even if they're very frightened of the aggressor, and they'll make some kind of appeasing posture or gesture like this crouch, or they might reach out a hand towards the aggressor. And usually in response to that request for reassurance, the aggressor will reach out and touch, as you see here, or pat, or kiss, or even embrace. And so everything becomes peaceful again quite quickly. They're very good at making friends after some kind of aggression. I explained that chimps live in small, constantly changing groups, and that means that there are many occasions when friendly chimpanzees who've been separated meet up again. They meet to feed, they meet to travel, they meet to groom each other, or something like that. And when they greet, they kiss, embrace, hold hands, pat one another on the back, and those are the kind of things that we do all around the world when we greet, and the chimps do them too. So we see how very much like us they are in their non-verbal, non-language communication. Here are two young ones embracing when they greet, and they're about to start a play session. And now here's the most famous of the Gombe chimpanzee families. We call it the F family, and many of you are familiar with the names Flo and Fifi, Fabian, Figan, and so forth. It's the F family because everybody born into that family has a name beginning with the letter F. And this slide is taken way back in 1964, soon after I arrived at Gombe. And there you see Flo with infant Flint, and she's with her daughter Fifi. In this picture, Fifi is about 5.5 years old. And Fifi is very special because she's the one chimpanzee who was alive in 1960, 40 years ago, who's still alive today. And here's another picture of Flo with her infant Flint. She's grooming Fifi, and Flo is being groomed by her 12-year-old son, Figan. So this is the age that Spindle was when he rescued Mel, 12 years old. And Figan is beginning to spend a lot of time with the big males like Spindle was. But Figan still spends a lot of time with his mother and his little brother and sister. And so you get these friendships growing stronger and stronger between the mother and her young ones, and between the brothers and sisters. Where's the father? Well, the father is off patrolling the boundaries of his territory. The father's job is to protect the territory for the females and young within it. And it's when they're patrolling the boundary of the territory that sometimes you see very, very hostile, aggressive, and brutal attacks made by the patrolling males on members of the neighboring community. And those attacks can actually lead to the death of the victim. So it's like a sort of warfare. And now, some years later, now we've jumped on from 1960 when it all began to 1971, and here's Fifi with her first baby. We called him Freud, and Fifi is being groomed by her brother Flint, and there is Granny Flo peeping down over her daughter's shoulder at her first known grandson. The young chimpanzees, I'm wondering if we can focus this. Young chimpanzees spend an awful lot of time in playing. They're like sort of hyperactive human kids. And when they get the chance, they seem to play from morning till night, only stopping when they get so tired that they fall asleep. But here, Freud is on your right, and he's run off to play with the youngsters of two other females that his mother happens to be traveling with. Now, they're all laughing. When chimpanzees laugh, it doesn't sound quite like us. It sounds like this. It's when they're being tickled. Well, some chimpanzee mothers are quite sociable and spend quite a lot of time with other females and young ones. Some mothers are less sociable and spend a lot of time alone with their offspring. Fifi was sociable. She spent a lot of time with other females. Her mother was sociable too. And so Freud had a lot of opportunities of playing with other youngsters. But like all mothers, Fifi also spent time alone. And although she was very playful herself with her young ones, she wasn't always in the mood to play, or she was busy feeding or something. And then Freud had to find ways to amuse himself. But in the wild, there's plenty for the young chimp to do. He can practice acrobatics in the trees. There are many objects that serve young chimps as toys, like rocks. They play with bunches of fruit, and they're very imaginative in their lone play. But in Gombe, there are many baboons, and these are the olive baboons. And there are fascinating relationships between chimpanzees and baboons, and that includes special play relationships between particular chimps and particular baboons. And Freud had a play relationship with Hector. Well, Hector is trying to play with another young baboon, but unfortunately for Hector, he's got that one thing that a chimpanzee doesn't have. Hector has a tail. And so Freud drags Hector away, and the two of them have a session of rough and tumble play. And Hector is tickling Freud here with little nibbling movements in his ticklish groin, and Freud is laughing. Well, I already said that the infant chimp in the wild travels on the mother's back, sleeps with her at night, and suckles for 5 whole years. And even after that, even when the new baby is born, the older child continues to travel around with the mother for a while. So that's a very long time to be dependent on your mother. And we think that it's important for chimpanzee children as for human children, because like us, like you, they have a lot to learn. And like you, they can learn by watching what goes on around them. So here is Freud watching very intently as another female grooms his mother, and this social grooming is so important in chimp society. It helps to maintain friendships and improve bad relationships and calm nervous or excitable chimps. And they learn about the different foods of their community, their population, and how to process those foods. And here is Freud watching as an adolescent female has cracked open a very hard-shelled fruit against a rock, and you can see the sticky juice all over her lips, and you see how fascinated Freud is with this performance. And by the time the young chimp is about 4 years old, he's learned how to use objects as tools. Now at Gombe, there are 9 different objects, 9 different ways that they're used, mostly for feeding, but also for cleaning the body and so forth. There are 9 different tool-using behaviors at Gombe. And the young ones learn these by observing the adults and imitating what they've seen and practicing it. And at Gombe, the most frequently seen tool use is this fishing for termites. That was the first thing I ever saw in the way of tool use. But what is so fascinating is that in different parts of Africa, everywhere where chimps have been studied, there are different kinds of tool use. And it seems that these are passed from one generation to the next through observation, learning, imitation, practice. And so we can talk about this as some kind of primitive culture. We used to think that only humans had culture. And there's still some controversy about whether or not we should call it culture in chimpanzees or any other big-brained animals. I believe that it's perfectly okay to call this a culture. This is a female in West Africa, and she's using 2 rocks, one is a hammer, one is an anvil, to crack open hard-shelled nuts. And you can see the young one up there hanging in, watching her. And we've never seen this use of hammer and anvil in East African chimps yet. And there are so many differences when you look at chimps, not only in tool using, but in the use of some of the postures and gestures, in some of their calls. It's like different dialects. All these things differ from the different populations. Now back to Fifi. Freud is almost exactly 5 years old when his little brother Frodo is born. And like all older brothers and sisters, Freud is absolutely fascinated with the new baby And he spends a lot of time sitting close to Fifi. He wants to play with little Frodo. He wants to groom him. And by the time Frodo is about 4 months old, Fifi often lets Freud carry his little brother when the family moves from one place to another. And they spend a lot of time playing. Here again, they're both laughing as Fifi sprawls out to rest. She's a very relaxed mother. She's a very playful mother. She's a wonderful mother. Some chimpanzee mothers are really not very good at all. And it makes a big difference when you're growing up in the wild as to whether you have a good mother or a bad mother. And so over these 40 years, we've learned so much about the chimpanzees, the different families, the different individual life histories, and it's been an enormous privilege. We've also learned something about the history of some of the communities at Gombe. There are 3 communities at Gombe, and they all have their different histories, just like humans have their different histories. And one of the most important things that these chimpanzees have taught us is that, after all, we humans are not as different from the rest of the animal kingdom as we used to think. We find that we're not the only beings with personalities, with minds. We're not the only beings capable of solving problems by thinking. And perhaps most important, we're not the only beings with emotions. Chimpanzees have emotions that are similar to, or maybe the same, as those that we call happiness, sadness, fear, despair, and so forth. We know from work in the wild as well as some work in captivity that chimpanzees have a sense of humor, that they can recognize themselves, that they can plan for the immediate future. In other words, there isn't a sharp line that divides us from the rest of the animal kingdom. It's a very fuzzy line. And that makes us think about animals in a different way. We realize that we're part of the animal kingdom. And the one thing which I think makes us most different is that we and only we have developed this very complex, very sophisticated spoken language, the kind of language that I'm using now, that I can use to make pictures for you with words, that I can use to help you understand things you've never seen. I can talk about places you've never been to. I can tell you about things that happened 40 years ago, and I can tell you about things that we hope will happen 50 years or 100 years ahead. And no animal except us can do that. And that, I think, it should make us feel very responsible, because we are the ones who have to look after this planet. We're the only ones, and we haven't been very good stewards. And it's very sad to find that the chimpanzees who've taught us so much are disappearing in Africa very fast. In captivity, in the wild, they only live in Africa. And they live right across from West Africa to where we are in Tanzania. There used to be 2 million chimpanzees 100 years ago. And how many are there now? Less than 150,000. And that's not very many. That's far fewer than any medium-sized town in any part of the world, and that's all that's left. And these chimpanzee surviving populations often are in very tiny, tiny pockets of forest, and all around the forest has gone. And if we think as to why, if we wonder why the chimps are disappearing like this, well, 100 years ago, there were 2 million chimps, roughly. 100 years ago, there were 2 billion human beings, roughly. Today, there are 6.1 billion human beings. And so as humans increase in numbers, they want more and more and more and more and more of the natural world, for their houses, for their crops, for their cattle, for whatever. And so the animals are losing out everywhere. Everywhere the animals are losing out. And chimpanzees are disappearing because their habitat is being destroyed. They're disappearing in some parts of Africa and Central Africa because they're being hunted for food, along with all other animals living in those great central forests. Chimpanzees at Gombe are safe. They're not being hunted. Their forest in the national park is not being harmed. But it's nevertheless a very grim picture for their future. When I got there in 1960, you could travel along Lake Tanganyika and look it up on your maps later. But you could travel along Lake Tanganyika for miles and miles and miles. The lake's 300 miles long. And you could travel along this eastern shore and you would see forests like this stretching down to very clean water. And if you go back today, the 10 miles of Gombe National Park looks just like this, but it's only 10 miles. And it stretches inland only to the peaks of the rift escarpment that you see there. It's a tiny, tiny national park, only 30 square miles. And there's only about 110 chimpanzees living in it, in their 3 different social groups. And that's not a big enough gene pool for long-term survival. If you go outside the Gombe National Park, you find that the trees have gone. Not just some trees, all trees. The only trees you see in this slide are trees that have been planted for shade. And the reason that this has happened is that people have cut down the trees for firewood and to try and make space to grow their crops. It's bad land for farming. It's very steep, it's very stony. And every time it rains, once the trees have gone, you get the soil washed down into the lake. Now, you know all about this in Taiwan. The same kind of thing happens here. You cut away the trees in the mountains, and then the water is no longer held, and it comes rushing down the mountains, and it makes mudslides, and it makes flooding, and people suffer too. And the people are suffering desperately now in this area around Gombe National Park. They can't grow enough crops. And it's happened because there are more people living here than this land can support, partly because their own populations have got bigger, but partly too because refugees have come pouring in from Burundi and from over the lake, from Congo. And in some places, as time goes on, what was a beautiful forest 15 years ago has become like a stony desert. And the people are beginning to struggle to survive. So about 10 years ago, I sat down with some of the students and other people of the Jane Goodall Institute and said, how can we possibly save these chimpanzees and their little precious 30 square miles of forest when the people outside the park are struggling to survive? And so we started a program which is called Takari, which is to try and improve the lives of the people in the villages around Gombe. And one of the main components of this program is to give them tree nurseries. And these tree nurseries provide fast-growing things like fruit trees and provide fruit and building poles and things like that. And they plant trees that will turn into shade providers and all kinds of different trees, ending up with the indigenous trees, the trees that once were there that they've cut down. And these tree nurseries are mostly looked after in the villages by little groups of women. And we're working in particular with groups of women because we find that as women get empowered, as women start earning money, as women have more control over their lives, and as women get more educated, family size drops. And if the family size doesn't drop in this part of Tanzania, the future is very, very grim, not just for the chimpanzees, but for the people as well. And so this program, Takari, which also provides conservation education, and it provides some farming techniques which are the most suitable for this very stony, rocky ground. And it provides conservation education, it provides family planning, AIDS education, and fresh water and wells. It's said to be the best of its kind in Africa. And so the people are now happy to help us care for the chimps. And in addition to this, we employ people from the villages around Gombe National Park to help study the chimps. These aren't just trackers and guides. These are men who make detailed reports about the behavior of the chimps. They know them by name, they care about them, they talk about them in the villages. There is no poaching at Gombe because all the surrounding people know how amazing the chimpanzees are. So these are the kind of things that we want to now start up in other parts of the world to try and help people and animals live together. Because the people help the animals if we can help the people to have better lives. The chimps of Gombe, as I've said, are, at least for their own lifetimes, safe from fear from humans. And every time I go back to Gombe, and it's 2 or 3 times a year, but never for more than 10 days at the maximum, what I want to do most is go out into the forest and be with some of the chimpanzees I've known for so many years. And this is a picture of my very favorite chimpanzee. Her name is Gremlin. She's the daughter of Melissa. Her mother, Melissa, gave birth to the first known twins at Gombe, and since then there have been 2 other pairs of twins. This is the 3rd set of twins. They're now 3 years old. They're named, the 2 little girls, their names are Gold and Glitter. And Gold is the one on your left. Gold, or Goldie as we call her, she's a tomboy. She rushes off to play and tumble about with any chimps that come anywhere near. And little Glitter is much quieter, much more thoughtful, stays closer to her mother, watches everything, is much better at using tools. So, and you see how different they look? Do you see that Goldie has that lovely white beard? So I sometimes wonder if she's the granddaughter of my very first chimpanzee friend, David Greybeard. I'm sure some of you remember his name. And so when I go back to Gombe, it's so wonderful after traveling the world for 300 days in the year to go and sit quietly with Gremlin and watch her with her beautiful twins. And then, of course, there's Fifi. Fifi, my oldest chimpanzee friend at Gombe. Fifi, who was a little baby in 1960 when I arrived. So that when I look into Fifi's eyes, and she almost always comes along when I'm there, when I look into her eyes, I know that there are certain memories that she and I alone in the world share from those early 60s, because everyone else who was there at the time has gone. But you know, the fascinating thing about this is that when I look deep into those eyes, I know that I'm looking into the eyes of a thinking, feeling being. But I will never, ever be able to get inside that mind and look out with a chimpanzee's eyes at the world. I will never know what Fifi thinks of me. And it's that mystery, the fact that even after 40 years we're still learning new things. This is what makes it so fascinating. This is why we're still continuing into our 42nd year. This is why we want to start other studies in other parts of Africa before it's too late, before the chimps disappear in the face of hunting and continued habitat destruction. And it's because of this destruction of the habitat in Africa. It's because of the growth of human populations. It's because of all the problems that we find in Africa and other parts of the developing world. It's because of all the pollution that we find in the developed world, the poisoning of the air and the water and the land, the synthetic chemicals. It's because of the hole in the ozone layer. It's because of the changing global climates as we burn too much fossil fuel. It's because of all these different things that Roots and Shoots was started 10 years ago. So I want to spend a little while talking to you about Roots and Shoots and about what you as an individual, you, each one of you, what you can do as an individual to make this world a better place. So that's the end of the slides, and then I want to talk a little bit about Roots and Shoots and your involvement and why we should have hope for the future. I see I talked for longer than I should because I was trying to talk carefully so that you all could understand. So all I'm going to say about Roots and Shoots, because we now have a very strong Roots and Shoots program here in Taiwan with Kelly Koch, who's somewhere around, Kelly Koch and Dora. And you've been doing Roots and Shoots in your school, so you know about Roots and Shoots. So I don't really need to spend a lot of time telling you about it, but I do hope that more of you will join it, because it's about making the world a better place for animals, for people, and for the environment that we share. And there's such a lot of good things going on in Taiwan. At the university where I was the day before yesterday, or yesterday I think it was, they had the best place for stray dogs that I've seen anywhere in the world. And that's right here in Taiwan. And that group will be part of Roots and Shoots. So there's a lot of stories from Taiwan that I'm taking around the world. Like I take this little antler from one of the rare Sika deers that was almost extinct. There were only 16 individuals left in zoos, but a clever captive breeding program meant that there are now more than 400 in 2 different national parks. And I take around these symbols because so many people feel there's very little hope in the world, especially now after the terrorist attacks. But, you know, it's not true. We always need hope for the future. And the human brain, the forgivingness of nature, how we can revive her after we've really damaged her, and how she can revive herself. And the energy of young people like you, when you really get committed and empowered and start acting and seeing the difference that you make. And then these amazing people who tackle impossible tasks and never give up. These are the hope for the future, and you are very much part of it, because the most important message of Roots and Shoots is that every individual matters and every individual makes a difference, and you make a difference every single day of your life. So that's my message for you. You make a difference every day, and together we can make this a better world, and together we can overcome all the different problems of the environment and society and warfare and crime and terror and greed. We can do it together. Thanks.
We would like to thank Dr. Goodall and her inspiring message. And many of you probably don't realize this, but Dr. Goodall, in her traveling 300 days a year, she also travels very lightly. So many of you are probably wondering where, with the Taiwanese custom of giving cut flowers and beautiful flowers for Dr. Goodall to depart from Taipei American School and to remember us as an audience, you probably are wondering where they are. Well, there are no such things for Dr. Goodall today. Out of respect for you in your travels, as well as out of respect for the work that she's doing in providing nurseries, tree nurseries, and in the conservation that happens with trees, Dr. Goodall, I'm going to present to you with a very thin piece of paper to take with you today. So in appreciation of your willingness to share your message of hope, Roots and Shoots, Taipei American School, would like to present to you our pledge to plant a tree in keeping with the tree conservation, one of JGI's many outreaches. Roots and Shoots members would like to plant this tree here on our campus in honor of another very important and special woman in our lives, of Hope Phillips, who donated the bonsai trees here in memory of her husband. Hope returns soon to the United States after 45 years in Taiwan, where she has served TAS in many and varied roles. So, on behalf of Taipei American School, I want to thank you very much, and we certainly appreciate your reason for hope.
How many of you recognize Mr. H? Any of you? Yes, quite a few. Mr. H, given to me by one of these real inspirational people who lost his eyesight when he was 25, wouldn't give up, decided to become a magician. They said to him, Gary, his name is Horn, that's why it's Mr. H. They said, Gary, you know, you need at least quarter of an eye to be a really good magician. You don't have any eyes. How can you be a magician? He said, well, I'm going to give it a try, and he's so good that the children don't realize he's blind, and then at the end of his show, he talks to them about, you know, sometimes things will go wrong in your life and you mustn't give up, and there's always a way forward, and you must make the most of what you have left. He took up scuba diving, cross-country skiing, skydiving, judo, karate. He climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. He thought he was giving me a chimpanzee for my birthday 5 years ago, and I said, Gary, I know you can't see it's the wrong color, but you have no excuse. He said, well, never mind, take him wherever you go, and you know I'm with you in spirit. So Mr. H has been with me to 49 countries, and he's probably been touched by several million people, because when you touch him, you get slightly inspired by this amazing man. So that's Mr. H, my mascot. By the way, I would also like to hold up one other thing, which I've recently acquired to carry around. You all know about the amazing heroism of the firemen and the police in New York after the terrorist attack. And unfortunately, after the plane crash that happened yesterday, they will have more work. But one of the rescue dogs hurt his foot very badly in the first week. He had to have 9 stitches. But he was really keen to get back to work, because at that time there were many people alive to be found. So they made him a little boot so that he could go on working. And as a surprise for me, after one of my talks, when I opened a Roots and Shoots Academy in the Bronx, in the poorest school in the whole of America, poorest school district, this dog came up on the platform with the police sergeant and raised his foot, which was now healed, so that I could take the little boot off. So this little boot has worked with the dog on ground zero. And so I take it around to remind us that it's not only humans who are capable of heroism and bravery, it's animals too.
So again,
I can tell them one last story. I've got time for one last story.
oh good, Dr. Goodall has time for one last story. So if we could be very, very quiet, and you on the stage, you've been super, but if we could just listen very carefully, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, you'll like this story. This is a story about a little chimp who was born in Africa. His mother was shot when he was 2 years old, because that's the only way you can get a baby chimp, is to shoot the mother. And he was sent off to a zoo in North America. And for a very long time, he lived all alone in a small, old-fashioned zoo cage with a cement floor and iron bars. And chimpanzees, of course, are very social, and they need to learn from each other. So he couldn't learn and he couldn't be social, and I suppose he was very unhappy. But anyway, eventually, when he was about 15 years old and full-grown, a new zoo director came along, and he built a huge enclosure, and he surrounded it by a moat filled with water, because chimps don't swim. And he brought 19 other chimpanzees, males and females, nice big gene group, and he introduced them carefully to each other, because they sometimes fight when they meet each other. And eventually they were all let loose into this enclosure. And everything was fine for a while, and then one of the younger males challenged the senior male, as young chimp males will, bristling his hair and swaggering. And the senior male was Jojo, who had lived alone for all these years. And Jojo didn't know anything about fighting, so in his fear he ran away into the water. He didn't know anything about water either. And he managed to scramble over the fence that was built to stop the chimps drowning in the deep water beyond. And he disappeared under the water. And 3 times he came up gasping for breath, and then he was gone. And on the far shore, there was a little group of people. There was a keeper there. He knew Jojo weighed 130 pounds. He knew chimpanzees are much stronger than humans. He knew that male chimpanzees are very dangerous. And so he just stood and watched. But luckily for Jojo, there was a man there who visits the zoo just one day a year with his family, his wife and his 3 little girls, and he jumped in. And he jumped in even though the keeper physically grabbed hold of him and told him he would be killed. And he swam feeling under the water until he touched Jojo's body. He got this 130-pound dead weight over his shoulder. He managed to scramble over that safety barrier. He pushed Jojo up onto the bank, and then he turned to go back to his rather hysterical family. Well, there was a woman there with a video camera. She doesn't remember filming. She was very agitated and the film's all over the place. But you can see and hear what happened next. First of all, the people on the far side of the bank start screaming at Rick to hurry back, that he's going to be killed, because they're higher than he, and they can see 3 of the big male chimps starting to see what all the commotion is about, with their hair bristling and their teeth gleaming. And at the same time, Jojo is sliding back into the water because the bank was too steep. And Jojo is making very feeble efforts to grab something, but he's half drowned. And the camera amazingly steadies on Rick as he stands. He's got one hand on that fence, he's ready to climb over it. And you see him look up at his family. You see him look up towards these 3 males who are starting down. And you see him looking at Jojo, who's just disappearing under the water again. And for a moment, Rick is motionless. And then he went back. And again he pushed Jojo up onto the bank. And this time he stayed there, in spite of the people yelling at him, in spite of these 3 big males, all much stronger than he. He stayed there, and Jojo, just in time, grabs onto a thick tuft of grass and manages to pull himself up to safety. And just in time, Rick gets back over that fence. And that evening, that little piece of film was shown all over America. And the director of my institute there saw it. And he said, "That was a very brave thing you did." He called up Rick Swope. He said, "That was a very brave thing you did. You must have known it was dangerous. Everyone was telling you. What made you do it?" And Rick said, "Well, you see, I happened to look into his eyes, and it was like looking into the eyes of a man. And the message was, won't anybody help me?" And you see, that's the look I've seen in the eyes of the little chimps for sale in the African markets whose mothers have been shot for food, which is why we have sanctuaries to care for them. It's the look that I've seen in the eyes of chimps in medical research laboratories, looking out from their 5-foot by 5-foot cages where they may be kept for 40 years. It's a look I've seen in the eyes of the circus chimps that we know today are trained with extreme cruelty. It's the look I've seen in the eyes of so many suffering animals, but of people too, children whose parents are shot in the fighting in Africa, children in inner cities caught up in the gang violence with nowhere to go. And once you've seen that look and felt it in your heart, you have to jump in and try to help. And alone you can't do very much. But all around the world, more and more people are seeing that look and feeling it in their heart and jumping in to help. And that is what Roots and Shoots is. It's people of different ages, and Roots and Shoots is preschool to university. And Roots and Shoots now is in 69 countries, and there are 125 groups already in Taiwan. And it's growing around the world so that there are more than 4,000 active groups, and every one of those individuals has seen a look for help and is jumping in and trying to do their best. So I hope that many more of you here will want to find out more about Roots and Shoots, and I know that Kelly will come and talk to you about it because it's her passion just as it is my passion. And how many of you want to help make the world a better place? Let's see. How many of you want to make the world a better place? What about saying it? I want to make the world a better place. Right. For people, for animals, and for the environment. For people, for animals, for the environment. Then your Roots and Shoots. I do hope you'll learn more about it, and that maybe I can come back and see some of the wonderful things that I know you've done and the wonderful things you're planning to do. And I wish I had a bit longer, but I haven't, so I'll say goodbye now, and I'm off to Japan to do Roots and Shoots there. Thanks.
Okay, middle school. First of all, thank you very much for being such a fabulous audience. Could you please remain seated while our lower school guests leave?